Hello, everybody, and happy new comic book day. Welcome to another episode of That's Comical. As always, I am Steve, your friendly neighborhood lawn gnome, and I am very excited because it is that time where we talk about the month that was in comic books. And of course, I am never doing this alone. I've got my friend Dan joining me again. Daniel, always a pleasure to have you. I hope you're ready for another great show.
Absolutely, Steve. Thanks again for having me on. I look forward to our discussions, and let's have a great show.
Absolutely. And of course, along with Dan, thanking him for being on the show, of course, I want to thank every single one of you that are watching the show. So if you do enjoy this video, please don't forget to leave a thumbs up as well as leave us a comment, especially if you're watching during the premiere, because we would love to chat with you in real time about comic books and popular culture. And of course, if you want to see all the nuttiness that happens over here on this channel, because let me tell you, we are crazier than a bunch of Arkham inmates, I'll tell you. Don't forget to subscribe and, of course, hit the notification bell so you are up to date with all of our latest content. And, of course, a very special announcement to make. Of course, you all know that our team has officially grown, and today is going to be the first day that you will be introduced to our friend Shayla over at Shae Geeks Out. You asked for some manga updates and what's new out there and what's worth reading, and of course, while I may personally be a fan of anime, I am not much of a manga reader, so I said to myself, if I really want to get a great bunch of viewers watching this show, we've got to expand, and we've got to expand quickly. So I am so excited to introduce Shae today. You will see her later on, and you will get the insight from her in regards to manga today, as well as the rest of the upcoming year. So, Daniel, we only scratched the surface last time we chatted about the month that was, and I think now it's officially time to really bring this specific conversation into the forefront. And that is the extremely large rise and popularity of the indie comic book market. As comic fans growing up in the 90s, you and I, we definitely saw that real moment that changed the tides. And that was the creation of Image comic books, and not just Image, Valiant comic books, and even some popularity from Dark Horse Comics, of course, because they did have the Star Wars franchise, and we were introduced to Hellboy as well, thanks to that company. But the whole concept of the indie market seems to have a lot more appeal to the average comic book reader than ever before. And it's not just new fans, it's fans who have been collecting for a very, very long time. And I speak to lots of different people about their attitude towards comics, especially people who are looking for comics to read. And I usually get the same things from a lot of these people. It's they're just not sure where to start, or they're just not satisfied with the classic 80-plus-year-old superhero formula. They want something new. They want something fresh. And right now, the indie market is not only delivering, but there are a lot of companies delivering as well. So here's the question, Daniel. Do you think where the comic industry is right now, especially with a lot of the downturn that Marvel and DC has been getting in the recent few years, do you think that it's time for one of these big two, or possibly both of them, to be dethroned and let the new blood finally take over the top spot?
I'll tell you, definitely not at this point. And the reason I'm going to say that is because they don't have cinematic universes, which is attracting more fans. When you have a Marvel Cinematic Universe and a DC universe, and then you have streaming services like Disney Plus and HBO Max, an indie company cannot compete with that. I know on a readership level when they're attracting new people, but as far as having the universe brings a multitude of fans, which at this point, until the indie comics have their own cinematic universe or they're intertwined with streaming, they can't beat out those companies as of yet.
I definitely see where you're coming from, but my attitude in regards to all of that is, yes, you're absolutely right. The exposure to the general public of the traditional superhero is definitely, you know, at the top of its game when it comes to Marvel and DC. I mean, the Marvel Cinematic Universe and to a certain degree, the DC Extended Universe have basically changed what the superhero movie used to be, because you and I can remember those old superhero movies and how over the top and cheesy they were, and how people always looked at them as jokes, even comparing them to, like, you know, old grindhouse movies and those traditional slasher films of the 1980s. But when the cinematic universe is starting to happen, we started to see the comic book characters getting taken very seriously. And that's also because of the fact that a lot of these creative minds who have been bringing these characters to the big screen have tried to be as close to the source material as they could be. Granted, they had to change a couple of things for cinematic value, but the one thing that I feel the indie market has that is stronger than the two big names in comic books today is that when someone who has never picked up a comic book is going to go and see one of those movies, there is a very slight, it's definitely, I would say, under 50% if I want to really get statistical. They're not going to go into a comic book store and pick up the latest issues of these books. I feel that when it comes to the indie market, you're right. They could use some really good movies. But if there's one thing that I know that the indie market has is stronger stories, incredible characters, and more importantly, they go down the roads that the big two won't go. I mean, look, that's why Image Comics happened. We mentioned the big names that Image Comics were. They all worked for Marvel. They were writing the most popular comics in the 1990s, and they were just all finished with Marvel because they didn't appreciate the fact that Marvel had this corporate mindset, and they just weren't going to let the creative minds do what they wanted to do, which was just let their creativity run wild. They were put into boxes. When they went to Image Comics, they shattered those glass ceilings, if you will, and broke down those barriers. They had the ability to write the types of comic books that they wanted, and they didn't want to hold back.
I agree with you on that point, but I still don't think they're at the point where they can overtake DC and Marvel. And I agree with you that they do have better stories, and they attract top name writers, like Image Comics has Tynion, Zdarsky, McFarlane's still doing Spawn. So on that point, I do agree, but you have to also think like small shops, they don't carry a lot of indie titles to begin with. They're ordering what sells. And
yeah.
DC and Marvel sell because of the brand name popularity of the characters.
You're right. Yeah, but unfortunately, over the last couple of months, I mean, look, Marvel and DC have definitely been, if you are an amusement park fan, you are loving Marvel and DC now because they're two completely different kinds of roller coasters. Marvel is constantly trying to do everything that they can to keep their readers engaged by every single month there's an event or there's a new #1. You know, with DC, they just did a massive overhaul of their company in general. And based on what they just did, because we talked about Future State last month, and that just officially concluded. And now their next stage in this storyline is about to begin with Infinite Frontier. But it seems that readers like you and me are just not as excited as we are when we pick up a book that is coming from Image Comics, Boom Studios, Scout Comics, Aftershock Comics. So it's interesting, and I do feel that right now, if what you're saying is absolutely correct, and I'm not saying that you're wrong, if these two companies, Marvel and DC, are still going to be taking the market right now because of what they have, I'm pretty sure that these indie comic book companies are taking very good notes, and they're taking a look at what is coming out in regards to their new books, and they're most likely shopping for possible movie and TV rights. I mean, we're going to talk a little bit about some of these specific books that are now really hot items in the indie market in just a couple of minutes. But think about the fact that we've got very well-known writers that are now writing a lot more for these indie books. And not just that, when you have not Marvel and not DC, but a small company called Boom Studios, which a lot of people are talking about right now, grabbing Wizards of the Coast to make a Magic the Gathering comic book series, as well as getting the Hasbro toy line to create G.I. Joe, Transformers, etc., and these were not taken by Marvel or DC. That says something.
Well, that's a great way to make inroads into merchandising and all that, and that will get more fans to read the books.
Yeah, absolutely.
But let me ask you a question. Name me the most popular Marvel and DC guy.
DC, it's definitely Batman is number one, and you can definitely tell that because of how much DC is milking Batman. And I would probably think that when it comes to Marvel, it's probably Spider-Man right now.
Agreed. Now, I'll pose the same question. Name me two popular characters from indie comics that people would know. I can only name you one.
Well, let's actually get into the topic of conversation, which is some of the most familiar that are from the indie market that happen to be really, really popular right now just because of the stories that are being written around these characters at the moment. Number one, Todd McFarlane's Spawn.
Got my first issue.
Oh yeah.
Had to bust that out.
Yeah, I got mine. I've shown that off on my channel a couple of times. And on the other side, people keep forgetting that this is an indie title. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And I mean, like, you take a look at those two comic books in particular. I mean, Spawn 300, I mean, this is issue 315. This is the latest issue. And I will say that this one was one of the best Spawn issues that I've read in a while. And we're going to get a little bit further into what's actually happening with Spawn, which is going to be very, very cool news to talk about. But Spawn 300, that book came out around the exact same time that J.J. Abrams and his son did their Spider-Man 1. And Spawn 300 crushed it. Virtually crushed it. And The Last Ronin, this brand new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle story from IDW, is killing it in sales. But why is that? These characters have been around for a very long time. I mean, it's
they're iconic.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy to believe that the Turtles are going to be approaching their 40th anniversary very soon. That is absolutely insane. And Spawn has, it's actually kind of funny because when I stopped collecting comics and started recollecting comics again in 2019, Spawn 300 was one of the first issues that I bought when I started to read again. I did some research and I could not believe all the stuff I missed. There were some amazing stories in Spawn. They were so rich based on the summaries that I read. Like, I had no idea that there was a point where Al Simmons wasn't Spawn. I didn't know that Wanda died. It was just so crazy. And people who have been with Todd McFarlane, the genius that he is, because he really is a genius, and it's great to see that he still has so much enthusiasm for comic books at his age right now, but he never lost his drive outside of his drawing. Like, he still is doing the writing, and he's still making this incredible ongoing story for Spawn.
I agree. Both Spawn and the Ninja Turtles are iconic. Although, growing up, the Ninja Turtles, we had the live-action movies, we had the TV show.
The first live-action film was loosely based on the original Mirage Studios book. So they did tip their hats to the original rendition of the Turtles, which were created by Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird. But of course, to get the kids into the seats of the theaters, they had to base them on the cartoon / the Archie comics, which was fine. It's a great movie, and it was one of the greatest things that Jim Henson ever gave me as far as I'm concerned. But I'm just really glad that I even though it took me a little bit of time to hunt down the first of these 5 Last Ronin books from IDW, I am forever changed when it comes to my attitude on the Turtles, because one thing that I love is the fact that Eastman and Laird came back to co-write this 5-issue miniseries, and it's some of the most beautiful comic writing that I have read. I mean, the first issue was wonderful, and the fact that we had to wait so long for the second issue to come out, I don't know about you. Do you think it was worth the wait?
Well, of course it was worth the wait.
Yeah, it was a great story. It was such a great second issue, and I loved that there was a portion of that book that was actually drawn by Kevin Eastman. That was beautiful.
I actually liked the homage to the original story when they gave Michelangelo's backstory and how he became the Ronin.
Yeah, I thought that was a great thing. I mean, again, the writing is just absolutely wonderful, and it's just because of the fact that the people who are behind these two characters just love their creations. And also, these may be indie books, but their characters are still very much known, because these two franchises did try to break through into other areas of media. I mean, look, I'm not going to lie, the Spawn live-action movie is really nothing special, but the HBO animated series is incredible. I mean, it was, if you were a Batman the Animated Series fan, that was basically Batman the Animated Series for mature audiences only. It was beautifully done. Still hate the fact that HBO canceled it on a cliffhanger. But Todd McFarlane, you know, he's built an empire. And at the same time, there was a point where Image Comics almost went into bankruptcy. And the funny thing was, when they decided to come back in a big way, they didn't bring the traditional superhero comics back into the fray for Image. They bet the farm on a book about zombies, which is now one of the most popular franchises in The Walking Dead. And that's also the reason why Robert Kirkman is now officially one of the main partners of Image. And then, of course, he gave us Invincible, which is going to be Amazon Prime show very, very soon. I am very excited to watch that animated series. And they also decided, outside of that, to have their other big book be a sci-fi romance in Saga. Saga was a story that I haven't read yet, but this not only got a lot of people to read it, it got a diverse bunch of readers. Both men and women read that story, and it's extremely popular.
Listen, they made a lot of inroads, but they're just not there yet.
Yeah.
In the future, I think there's definitely a possibility that they can get there, but at this point, they're just not there yet.
Yeah. I also think that one of the other reasons why the indie market is really starting to become a lot more noticed and a lot more popular is just because of some of the strategies that some of these smaller companies have. I mean, I think that two of the most intriguing marketing plans out there are from these two specific companies. One is Aftershock Comics. I mentioned the comic book We Live, which I absolutely love, and it just finished 2 months ago, and there's a sequel series coming in the summer, so I'm very excited about that. And Bad Idea Comics. Now, what makes these two marketing plans unique? When it comes to people like you and me, you know, we would love to spend as much money as we can on the books that we want to read. But we have to kind of choose wisely right now, because there are some books that you may not want to buy all of those issues to get everything that you possibly can. I mean, I think that's one of the most intimidating things about comic readers today who are new, because there are some of these franchises that have so many issues they don't know where to go. What's so amazing about Aftershock is that they only make limited series. So they are only making stories that are 4 issues to possibly 6 or 7 issues long. So you know that you're going to get the story that you want to read. You're not going to have to invest too much in it. And I also think that one of the best parts about having a nothing but miniseries is the fact that that increases the want to reread a story, because it's such a quick and easy read, you know?
I agree. I also like the fact that in a mini series you're getting the meat and potatoes. There's no filler. You get the beginning, you get the middle, the climactic part, and the conclusion, and done. Don't
And
have to invest all that money, like you said. You don't have to wait 50 to 100 issues to get to the end of the story, and then or like Marvel does, and then they cancel it, and they rewrite it and do another. It's just much better that way with the miniseries.
and also when it comes to the big two, sometimes they will do those exact same things. They will make a miniseries. Like right now, my favorite Marvel book is a miniseries. I'm reading those Maestro miniseries. They're great because exactly, you get the meat and potatoes, and if it's popular, they'll continue it on. I mean, that's why We Live is having a second series. It's going to continue on because people want more. Now, I wanted to ask you, you picked up one of the Aftershock miniseries that I did not. So I was curious to know, now that you've gotten the first issue, do you want to finish the miniseries?
Absolutely. I got Maniac of New York. I don't have the copy to show, but it was a very interesting read and concept. It was about a serial killer who came in 2016 in Times Square, and he killed a lot of people on the
Clearly.
spot. And he's been doing it. He's been doing it for many years, and he has supernatural powers. They assigned a whole detective unit to him, and they couldn't stop him. And then people just got used to it, and they accepted the fact that he would be killing people. And then someone comes along and they're like, no, we got to stop this guy. And
Yeah.
they're running into trouble at every turn to try and get help. That's the gist of the story. I believe it's a 3-issue miniseries, and it's short, and I think you're getting good writing, good art. You're not beating a dead horse when you're getting 100 different Batman miniseries, Avengers miniseries, Spider-Man miniseries. It's all new. That's what I like as well.
Yeah, and I mean, you and I have really seemed to gravitate towards Aftershock because a lot of the stories that are coming out right now are very, very good stories. I mean, I'm hoping that you will read We Live because it really is a wonderful story, but I started reading one of the new series that they made called Shadow Doctor, which is going to be a 4-issue miniseries. Very excited to continue to read that because it's about mob culture in the 1930s, and that's actually something that still truly fascinates me to this very day. Nuclear Family, which is a alternate take on the Cold War, which sounds really, really cool to read. And even some of the books that haven't even come out yet. Like, I was very interested, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to buy it. But now I'm certain that I want to read it, and it's called Project Patron. And the reason why I'm so excited about it is because it's supposed to be a take on the deconstruction of a superhero. And they're going to base it on a story that is similar to the death of Superman and Reign of the Supermen. So I'm really curious to see how they're going to pick the traditional superhero apart and put it back together. It really intrigues me. And that's also going to be a 4-issue miniseries. So that starts in April. And also everything that's coming out from the indie markets that have excellent writers attached. I mean, I am so glad to know that Stillwater, while it's on hiatus right now because its first story arc just wrapped up, issue number 7 is coming out in May. And yes, Chip Zdarsky is still attached. So I'm very excited to know that he's still there. Another story that I am very excited to get back into is Al Ewing's We Only Find Them When They're Dead from Boom Studios. The first 5 issues were fantastic. I'm really excited for the next couple. I think it's supposed to be a total of 12 issues. I'm not exactly sure. And Bad Idea Comics is a very interesting new company. They don't have that many titles right now, but they definitely have already gotten a good writer. They've got Matt Kint, and we're going to talk about him a little bit later. But what's so interesting about their marketing plan is also miniseries. And their first one just came out, and I showed it just a couple minutes ago. It was a story called Eniac. It's based on the famous computer that the United States used to take down the Germans in World War II, but it's a little bit of a twist with an alternate history piece to it, which is really, really cool. The art is fantastic. I got hooked into it right away. And what's so interesting about this company, and I really want to know what your thoughts on this are, Dan, it's the fact that Bad Idea Comics is not allowing people to read their comics digitally. They want to stick to print. They do not let you order the comics directly online from them. You have to go to your local comic book store and buy a physical copy of the book. Now, the one thing that I am not too thrilled about is the fact that it's just limited to a certain number of stores. I got extremely lucky knowing that my store was one of the places that got the book. So I'm sort of feeling a little bad for the people who are interested in the story but have no way of getting some of these books, because knowing that they've also got one of my favorite writers, Robert Venditti, who's going to be writing a 3-issue miniseries for them called Tankers. I am so excited for that. The one shot that Matt Kint is going to be writing for them called Whalesville, which looks so interesting. And then there's this newcomer whose name I can't remember, but her comic book is coming in July, and it's called The Lot. It's a horror story. So I feel a little bit bad for people who can't get these books physically because it's the only way to get them. And Bad Idea,
I'm one of them.
Yeah, Bad Idea's got some very strict rules. One of their retailers was actually selling the book, Eniac 1, at a higher price before the 30-day rule. I didn't even know this. You have to wait 30 days or something like that before you want to raise the price from cover to a different price for a new comic book. So when Bad Idea found this out, they told this store, you're not getting our books anymore. You lost.
That I kind of like that idea, but the problem I have is I am okay with no digital because I don't read digital to begin with. I like having physical copy in my hand, but the fact that it was so hard to get the book. And if you look on eBay, they want $150 for the book.
Yeah, I can't believe that.
Additionally, Bad Idea has the first printings, which says nothing on it, and then a second print which says it's not first print.
Right.
Which is an interesting way of doing things. But I still disagree with the fact that they limited it to certain comic stores. I don't know what the reason was, maybe to make it more scarce, or maybe they couldn't print as many, but the availability was a problem.
Well, I will say it could be a mixture, because I will say that Eniac #1 is one of the highest quality books that I have ever held in my hand. Like, it is really, really, really good quality. So I would probably say that it did cost them a little more than normal to print this book. But the only thing that I'm curious about for them in the future is, where are they going to go? Are they going to stick to this plan? Are they going to keep these books limited? I mean, look, clearly, when you take a look at what happened with Image Comics, I mean, obviously Todd Mcfarlane learned his lesson, and learned his lesson well, because when the first issues of Spawn came out, I mean, look, remember how much books like Spawn #1 and Gen 13 #1 used to be worth, and now they're like, you can get these books for such inexpensive prices right now wherever you look.
Well, you're talking about overprinting and then underprinting.
Exactly.
So you need some happy medium in the middle.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that that's where Todd Mcfarlane is right now, because I think what he does is he does a lot more with the variant covers, but I don't think he's overprinting them. He's just making various variant covers, and he's keeping them to a limited publishing, and you just get your hands on what you want to get your hands on. You know, I guess. I'm not entirely sure. But, I mean, he's definitely got big plans for his creation, because it looks like he's trying to find his way through the barrier that DC and Marvel have put up for so many years, because they have reached an impasse right now. So now Todd Mcfarlane has announced that he is going to be doing the biggest thing that has happened in Image Comics since the creation of Image Comics. And that is, he wants to make a Spawn comic universe. How do you feel about that?
Let me stop you right there and just talk about some of the writers and artists that are going to be in this universe.
Go for it.
All right, so we have Mariko Tamaki. We have Art Adams, Jason Sean Alexander, J. Scott Campbell, Greg Capullo, Donnie Cates, David Finch, Sean Gordon Murphy, Mark Silvestri, as well as others that are going to be named. Now that's like frontline talent nowadays you're talking about. Reminds me kind of like the Image Revolution when you had Liefeld, Lee, Silvestri, McFarlane, all those big names jumping ship.
Yeah.
I mean, he did it once. Maybe he's trying to work the magic a second time.
Yeah, I mean, he literally has Chip Zdarsky writing a bunch of Image books right now. He has Scott Snyder writing a new Image book, which we'll talk about just a little bit later because it will fit the next topic. But yeah, the big question is really going to be, even though that is an excellent laundry list of famous faces in the comic book world and very popular names in the comic book world, I might add, the question is, are they going to be there for the long run, or are they going to be there just as a one-shot deal? I mean, I personally think that Donnie Cates is there for the long haul. That's just my thought. I would be a little upset if I was wrong, but considering the fact that they announced that he's walking away from Venom very soon, and there doesn't seem to be a new Thor issue coming out anytime soon right now. I still don't see any solicitations for Thor issue 15, and by that time, the last story that he's been writing for Thor will be done.
Right.
So he seems to be gaining some very good ground with crossover right now, and I didn't even realize that he had written for Image Comics for a while now. I didn't know that he wrote this amazing comic book that people adore called God Country, which is actually being referenced in crossover right now. Crossover is hit or miss for certain people. I mean, I like crossover. I think it's a really cool story, but
I like it too. My problem with it is I'm a little bit lost. I don't know a lot of the characters in it, so he's introducing. I know they're from his other runs. I think he does Redneck for Image, A Tomahawk. I think he brought some Dark Horse characters into the crossover. I'm just not familiar. So the story itself is good, but the fact that he's bringing in all these characters I don't know is what makes it hard for me to, understand what's going on.
But anyway, I'm pretty excited for this brand new Spawn universe. I mean, that's why I'm kind of happy that the issue of Spawn that I thought I was actually going to stop reading Spawn for a while on, which was issue number 313, I liked the fact that it ended on a cliffhanger. Because right now, from issue 314 until now, the current storyline is called The Chain Gang. It's the coming together of this Spawn team that is going to be featured in one of the new titles later on this year, which is going to be called The Scourge. So this is sort of like his take on the MCU Avengers to a degree. All these different Spawns are going to come together to take down this unstoppable force, and then the sky's the limit. So there's going to be a one-shot after Spawn 318, which is going to lead into the one-shot called Spawn's Universe. And then there's going to be 3 titles that follow that are going to be ongoing. So, look, I'm going to sort of unleash the young Steve who was collecting comic books when he was younger in the 90s, and I'm definitely going to pick up every number 1 because I would like to see where this goes. I like Todd Mcfarlane. I'm glad that I'm reading Spawn again. I've been reading from issue 300 and forward. I even picked up a couple of the issues that led up to the road to 300. I've read issues 289 to 314, and the whole story is great. So I'm excited for this new universe.
I am as well. I remember those days when we used to only pick up issue number 1s.
Well, it
was smart and stupid at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I take a look at some of those number 1s and I basically say to myself, wow, I really should have read more of those stories. Like, I still remember when we picked up Grant Morrison's JLA number 1, and that was like one of the most popular comic books for such a long time. I actually did pick up issues 2 through 5. They were very easy to get my hands on because to a certain degree they are connected to Blackest Night in a very, very slight way. It was basically how Kyle Rayner continues his growth as the new Green Lantern. So I read issues 1 through 5, and it's actually a really good story. So I'm glad I was able to find those other issues, but luckily they weren't that inexpensive. They were not expensive.
Hey, who knows? One day it may be valuable.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, look, they're valuable to me already just because I enjoyed the stories. So clearly, Todd McFarlane is doing this because he's obviously trying to create his own little Image Comics universe. He wants to also do a lot of stuff outside of the comic books. I mean, there is his Spawn film that apparently Jamie Foxx and Jeremy Renner are tied to. They just haven't really gotten it off the ground, but I think that he being the writer and the director, because he did write and direct the animated series, and that was fantastic. I think that his version of the film will finally be the Spawn film that the true fans have been waiting for. So I think that this comic book universe that he's creating is definitely going to help. And I think that it's going to really pave the way for what he really wants Image Comics to be. He obviously wants to take that formula that seems to be working for DC and Marvel and turn it into something bigger and better. But the difference is it's not going to be the traditional superhero formula.
I agree. If the movie's successful, then it will sprout more legs, more comic titles, more movies, and then, only then, will they have a chance to topple one of the big two.
Yeah, and I also think that what's really going to be great is that I think that the creative minds that are going to be behind McFarlane and possible future Image movies is that they're really going to treat these movies with the fans in mind. Like, they're really going to treat them like they write the Image books. Like, they're really going to want to make them for the true comic book reader and fan. So they're not going to hold anything back. They're going to really make them authentic. And look, I don't know what studio is going to pick them up, but I definitely know that if Image Comics has the ability to back it, I think that they'll make it work. But anyway, that leads into the other topic that we really wanted to discuss today, and that was the whole concept of the superhero. You know, there's that iconic superhero formula that pretty much began with Action Comics, with the first appearance of Superman way back in 1938, and the rest was history. But even though those movies are doing very well, I can see a lot of people who are very much in our age range, because it's crazy to believe that a large portion of comic book readers right now are actually people ranging from like 30 to 60. That's crazy. But that's great. It's nice to know. But the classic superhero formula is not really grabbing us as much as it used to. I mean, look, after reading Future State, I really am not excited as much as I used to. I mean, when I got back into comics, I was very excited to read those classic superhero stories, just because I knew I had some catching up to do. But now I've read all those books. I've read a lot of what I missed. And now what the future holds for these amazing characters that I've known ever since I was a kid, I'm not really interested. They're not exciting me that much.
You're right, as far as they're doing the same iteration of superheroes over and over. They're not changing enough of the story. Whereas in the independent books, you're getting brand new superheroes, brand new titles. And I think that's what's drawing us away from DC and Marvel and towards those indies as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, we've got this new comic book that just came out in February, which was called Radiant Black #1. There is a universe apparently being built, and this is the starting point. This is like their Spider-Man, Image Comics. There were some people who didn't like this book. I personally enjoyed it, and I love the whole concept, even though they haven't really explained it yet. Basically, It's the story of a guy who's just truly down on his luck, and all of a sudden he sees this glowing orb that turns him into a superhero. We don't know it just yet, but the summaries have already explained it. Apparently, the superpowers that he discovered are something that was created by a group of aliens somewhere, and they want those powers back, and they're accusing him of stealing them. How interesting is that?
It's very interesting. And I also like the fact that you said they're doing universe building. Whenever you get into a comic, as far as a reading standpoint or a collecting standpoint, the fact that they're universe building is a good indication that they're going to stick with the comic for a considerable amount of time. And they're going to put good quality work into it.
Yeah, exactly. And even the smaller indie companies are trying to build their own universes. I mean, I had never even heard of this company, AWA Upshot, but this story, Erratic, also very much like a Spider-Man story, the story of a young teenage boy who has superpowers, but he can only use them every day for only 10 minutes. So it's all about, when is this power going to arrive, and will it arrive when I'm actually supposed to do something that's important and saving lives and stuff like that. They break a lot of stereotypes. I really like that they play a little bit of a joke on politics and political correctness. I really like that. But again, apparently, this is only 5 issues, but apparently they want this character to be a universe builder as well. So the fact that even a small company that can barely even get its name out there is taking such a bold move to create a universe is a very admirable thing.
Well, I think they took a cue from the Marvel and DC. That's the way to go these days. That's what fans want. That's what movies, it all leads into movies and TV. That's what people want to see. They just don't want to see an individual character. They want to see the universe surrounding the character as well.
Now, even though this is a February 2021 wrap-up, guys, Daniel and I both agree that there was a specific comic book that we needed to talk about just because of the fact that it was supposed to come out in February. It got pushed back. It was supposed to come out the year before. But Dan, clearly we got to talk a little bit about Keanu Reeves and Nat Kent's Berserker from Boom Studios.
It was a fun read, I'll tell you that. And for people who are scared of gore, it's not a book for you. A lot of gore in the book.
Yeah.
But also a lot of action. A buddy of mine explained it to me as John Wick on steroids.
That's the best way to explain it. I mean, the character even looks like Keanu Reeves himself. I mean, the cool thing is, you know, Keanu Reeves co-writing this book, and that's already brownie points right there. But again, he didn't go to Marvel or DC. He didn't even go to Image Comics. That was even more interesting. I think that Image Comics would have died to write this book. But he went to Boom Studios, which is a real up-and-coming company right now. I mean, when it comes to my indie books, my top 3 companies that I see myself buying comics from is Image Comics, Boom Studios, and Aftershock. Those are my 3 large purchases when it comes to comic books in a given month. And it's such an interesting story because it's not even a superhero, it's an immortal who's basically working for the US government, and he's doing this because it's the only thing that he knows. And the way that this book was written was so unique because it's basically starts as a silent issue, and there are a few voice bubbles throughout, but as we get to the end, the thought bubbles start to show up a lot more often. It slows down a little bit after all the killing and all the blood and gore, and then at the end, you get that big twists thing, and I don't know about you, but I was ready for issue number 2.
Definitely. The beginning was a little bit odd to me, and I'm like, we're just getting pictures, we're not getting dialogue. And then, as you said, as keep going and going into the book, get more dialogue, and at the end, definitely left you wanting more. Yeah. I think that was definitely the purpose of issue 1.
Absolutely. And I'm really excited to see where this conversation will take us in the next couple of episodes, because this is definitely going to be one of our #1 talking points on this show, just because even though there's been a lot of negativity in comic books, particularly revolving around the big two, it really is the indie comics that are fueling the positive fires of the comic book industry as a whole. I mean, there are so many cool books that are coming out over the next couple of months, and it's not just the stories and the characters that are intriguing me. It's just the fact that we are seeing so many big names bringing these books to us. I mean, I mentioned Scott Snyder's Nocterra. That just came out in March. We'll most likely talk about that one in future videos. We've got a brand new Jeff Johns book in Geiger coming out from Image Comics. I am very excited about that. One of my favorite reads of February was something that was so outlandish, and that was Stray Dogs #1. That was Disney gone wrong in all the right ways. It's the story from a dog's perspective, a female dog who suddenly shows up in a house with a bunch of other dogs. And like, you take a look at these dogs and they all look like something that you had seen in a Don Bluth or a Disney animated film. The thing that she suddenly realizes is that her master has been killed and she is now in the serial killer's house with all these dogs. So it's just something that you don't see in Marvel or DC Comics. I mean, today we got Grant Morrison's new book from Boom Studios, Proctor Valley Road. Very excited to see what this book is all about. And it's just knowing that all of these big names are willing to give these independent companies their time and their talent. What it shows me is, for them, could it be just about the money? I don't know. But what
I personally think the #1 reason is because they have creator-owned properties.
Exactly.
I think that's the biggest draw.
I would love to get into James Tynion's head one day and just say to myself, or maybe even see what he says, what does he have more fun writing? Is it Batman? Is it Something's Killing the Children? Or is it the Department of Truth? Because you read all three of those, and you like them all.
Yes.
And I would ask the same thing to someone like Chip Zdarsky. Like, what does he have more freedom when it comes to writing? Is it Daredevil or is it Stillwater? But also, the thing that's very interesting about Zdarsky is the fact that he really is, right now, he's the ultimate comic book journeyman. Like, he is writing for everybody. I am interested in his new Spider-Man miniseries, which looks very interesting. And I'm also even more interested in his Justice League miniseries that he's doing this year.
He's definitely a good writer who can cross all sorts of different storylines.
Yeah.
And I am excited not for Justice League, because I don't really read that, but definitely for Spider-Man.
Well, the good thing about the Justice League story is that it really doesn't seem to be connected to anything. It's its own story. So you could probably read that and not have to worry about going into any other Justice League comics.
Is it a miniseries?
Yes. It's digital first. It's 12 issues, but what I've heard is that they're going to condense them in print form. So it's going to be like 2 books in 1 issue. Okay.
That means they're going to jack up the price.
Well, who knows? I mean, as far as I can see right now, it's $4, so that's not bad.
That's reasonable.
But the other thing is about the indie comics is also, I think what also drives a lot of these writers, whether they are people who write for the big two or just people who are trying to write something for the first time, it's not just because of the fact that they own their own creations. It's also because of the liberties that they have. I mean, Daniel, I'm just going to be blunt and ask you a question. Do you really think that W. Maxwell Prince would have been able to survive as a DC or a Marvel writer?
Definitely not.
Did you read Ha issue #2 yet?
I didn't read it yet, but I know his style of writing, so I don't think that would fly in Marvel or DC.
Yeah, I mean, the stories that he comes up with, because now I am in the middle of Ha. I don't think I'm going to read Ice Cream Man. but I did read his Boom Studios miniseries King of Nowhere, which was like Alice in Wonderland was written by the Coen brothers. It was such a trip in all the right ways. I loved that book. It was so weird and different. And I also want to read his trade paperback of One Week at the Library. It just seems like an interesting idea. He is definitely a thought-provoking writer, and he's really there to not just give you a good story, but he's actually also trying to give you some messages as well. Not saying that comic book writers don't do that. I mean, so many of them do. But the way that he writes and the styles of artwork and the message that he sends, it just creates these amazing atmospheres that just make you want to read more. And that's another thing that I think these indie comics do. I mean, when I open up an indie book, maybe outside of one of the big names like Spawn, I just get so fascinated by this artwork that I see. And no two indie books feel the same. Like, I will open up We Only Find Them When They're Dead, get this beautiful, calming color palette, a very anime/Star Trek science fiction story. But then I'll open up the Department of Truth and I'll see like this scratchy artwork that keeps me on the edge of my seat, and it just gets me sucked into that story. And I just want to keep on reading. That's something I just don't feel these days when it comes to some of these classic characters that have been around and have been given iconic status.
I think to add to what you're saying is they kind of have to have good reads and good art to catch you into the story, because they can't throw out garbage like Marvel and DC because they have money to throw around and spend on junk. Whereas here, you know, they have a certain amount of money and certain amount of time to get things out. So if they hook you in, then they can get you, you know, invested in the rest of the series.
Right. And I mean, the other interesting thing is the fact that we're at a time right now that really actually began when you and I were younger and collecting books, where the reader was not necessarily following the comic book characters or the titles. They were following the writers. They were following the artists. And I think we're seeing that a lot more now because, you know, when that was starting in the 90s, there were very few of those artists that people actually classified as top-notch. But where we are now, some of those artists and writers, thankfully, are still with us, and still some of them are doing their thing. But there's a whole new generation of writers and artists that have followed in these pioneer footsteps and have basically gotten not just the readers hooked, but because of the fact that they are not all tied down to one company, they really are journeymen. That's what's causing these indie markets to explode, because Robert Venditti, he wrote Green Lantern, he wrote Hawkman, he's hopefully gonna write a possible JSA title if they choose to give it to him. He's gonna be writing this Superman 78 miniseries. And that's all from big companies. But his fans have probably heard about tankers from Bad Idea. And some of these people are probably going to go through hell or high water to get their hands on this book because they are just excited to see this completely different idea from someone that they're so familiar with. And I love that.
Well, I heard that the big companies allow these writers to sign contracts. They allow stipulations where they can write a certain amount of indie titles. And I think they learned from their mistake back in the day where McFarlane and Jim Lee and Liefeld left, to allow them to, you know, put their ideas in other places and not only stick to the Marvel or DC stuff.
Right. Well, I don't know about you, Daniel, but I am very excited for the next couple of months as far as the indie market goes. I mean, you know that I take pictures of my weekly hauls. I send them to all of you guys because we want to show each other what we're reading and what we're collecting. But if you actually take a look at some of those pictures and you like track it all back, at one point in time, there were so many Marvel and DC books. And with every passing week, those two companies' books, they're shrinking. Like, seriously, it's like there was a point where I had like a whole bunch of indie books and like 1 or 2 Marvel books and 1 DC book. And I think there's going to come a day where there are no Marvel or DC books picked up in a given week from me. Am I upset about that? To a certain degree, yes, but to a certain degree, no. And that's basically me, the reader, saying, Marvel, DC, check yourself before you wreck yourself. You know, you got to start realizing that your fans really want to stick with you, but you're not giving us the ability to want to stay. I mean, I heard something really funny earlier this weekend from the Comics Aficionados podcast over on Thinking Critical's channel on YouTube. They basically said that Marvel and DC have become Wile E. Coyote, and the fan has become the Roadrunner. And they are constantly going and buying all of these things from Acme, meaning the metaphor is they're making new events and new #1s, etc., and they still cannot figure out how to catch that Roadrunner.
I definitely agree with you. Marvel and DC definitely have to put up or shut up, to put it bluntly.
Yeah, absolutely. But anyway, that's going to wrap up the actual topics of conversation for today. But before we get into the February 2021 recap quick bits for the week, we are now going to step aside and introduce our friend Shae from Shae Geeks Out, who is going to get you all up to speed on what's going on in the wonderful world that is manga. So, Shae, the floor is now officially yours for the Manga Minute.
Hi friends, my name is Shayla and welcome to my channel, Shae Geeks Out. I want to thank Steve and the crew over at That's Comic Hell for inviting me to participate and give you guys some information about manga each month. So let's quickly dive in to the February highlights. I'll always do the previous month, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about any new licenses that come out, 1 or 2 new series, and then I'll always give you a recommendation at the end of this, and hopefully you will get a chance to explore manga a little bit more if you haven't yet. So let's go ahead and dive in. Let's start with the new series first. So 2 new series that came out this last month that I thought people would be interested in. Both actually come from Viz Media this time. This is Zom 100 Bucket List of the Dead. This is a zombie series where a depressed office worker named Akira Tendo discovers he's surrounded by zombies when he finds his landlord eating one of the other tenants. I've heard amazing things about this one. I have not picked this one up in particular yet, but all my friends who have really enjoyed it. The other one I'm going to talk about for the month of February is The King's Beast. This is a follow-up series or a second series in the same world as Dawn of the Arcana by the talented Ray Toma, in which we have a girl who's basically posing as a boy, and she's what they call an Ajin. It is a humanoid-like animal. I believe she's a fox. I can't remember, but she's posing as a boy to gain access to the court to get revenge for them killing her brother. It's really interesting, really, really good, solid political series. Really enjoy it. Okay, so those are the new series that I'm going to mention this time, and I'm going to switch around publishers and stuff, so don't worry about that. So let's talk about licensing here really quick. 7 Seas did an amazing licensing blitz where they talked about a bunch of new licenses. Basically, they were talking about a new license a day the whole month of February. So there are lots of new licenses. I will make sure Steve has the link to put in the description down below to their Twitter thread where you can find them all, because it was huge. It was epic. I'm only going to mention a handful of them here. They're really coming out with some amazing stuff, and I'm really excited. So the first one I'm going to mention is I Have a Secret by Yoru Sumino. This, I believe we're getting a light novel and a manga adaptation of this. This is the same person who does things like At Night I Become a Monster, I Want to Eat Your Pancreas, and things, so we're always really excited to get a new license from them. The next one that caught my eye that I thought more people would enjoy is called Creepy Cat. It's by Cotton Valent, and this is actually based on a webcomic. It looks creepy and cute, gives me very like Addams Family kind of vibes from it, so I'm really interested in this particular one. The next one I have on the list here is Time Stop Hero by Yasunari Mitsunaga. I try really hard with the Japanese games, I'm sorry. This is a video game inspired isekai story, and you know, Seven Seas loves their isekai. So isekai, if you're not familiar, I realize you might not know the term, is basically a person in like modern day being transported into another world. That's the easy way to describe that. The next one I'm going to mention is one that's really sweet and really cute looking, and that is Daily Report About My Witch Senpai. This just looks all sorts of adorable. So those of you who look for the cutesy and adorable that watch this show, not too many of you yet probably, but either way, I think it looks absolutely adorable. So I wanted to share it. And then the last one is Karate Survivor in Another World. Again, another isekai. This one is by Yazen and Takahito Kobayashi, I believe is how you say their names. And this just looks really solid. So I think it'll be really enjoyable for a lot of people. Viz also had a licensing event in February, so I'm going to quickly go over a couple of the highlights from that. They announced several box sets. Two of the ones that people were really excited about were the Demon Slayer complete box set and the box set number 4 for One Piece. These are both really popular shonen titles, and they're very battle-centered, very fun, very engaging. The next one I'm going to mention is Deserter by Junji Ito. This is another short story collection. I'm personally triggered by Junji Ito, so I don't really enjoy these, but I know all of my friends are super excited about any Junji Ito release, so I thought it warranted being here. A couple that I am personally excited for is Rose and Blood. This is a gothic mansion full of vampires kind of situation, and I love me some vampires, and the art looks fantastic for this, so I'm really excited. And then I also have Mao by Rumiko Takahashi. This is the same mangaka that did things like Inuyasha, Maison Ikoku, Urusei Yatsura, Ranma Half, a lot of amazing things. So I'm really excited to be getting their newest series. Today's recommendation is going to be Beastars. Beastars is currently, I believe volume 11 comes out in March, but it's pretty deep. It's at about the halfway point of the series. In this series, we're following, it's kind of a Zootopia type story, but a little bit darker, a little more twisted, in which we have carnivores and herbivores trying to live peacefully together and the ramifications of that. We do center at Charrington Academy, which is a high school, and they want someone to be the Beastar to represent beast kind, essentially. And it's really interesting and twisty. You have a wolf who's in love with a rabbit. There is an anime for this series that is really solid. You can find it on Netflix, and I highly recommend the series. No, you're not going to become a furry because you like this series. It's really enjoyable. I highly recommend it. So once again, thanks to the Comical crew for inviting me to take part. Turning it back over to the hosts for today.
Shae, thank you very much for taking the time. We are so happy to have you on this team, and we are looking forward to more of your insight in the world of manga. Maybe I'm going to actually end up picking up some of those. Just another thing for me to spend my money on. There's nothing wrong with that. But anyway, let's get into the February 2021 recap quick bits.
All right. Well, I'm going to bring up the Star Wars High Republic. I know we junked the first issue as being terrible, although it had a lot of first appearances for collectors. So glad we both got our hands on one. I got a second print. And because of the fact that they were world building, and I said to myself, you know, I do like to collect and not only like the stories all the time. I get hooked on collecting sometimes, and I know you do too. More or less. That's the old Steve. So I decided to buy issue 2, which was a lot better.
Okay.
And I continued with issue 3.
Okay.
Which continued the good story. You were introduced to some new Jedis. They were actually twins. They're called Seret and Tarek. And it was interesting how they introduced the Nihil and the Granger, who are the two villains in the story. And although they are plants, what's interesting about them is they are considered the dark side.
Okay.
So, you know, in Star Wars, there's always the yin, the yang, the evil, the Jedi, and the dark force. So I like the story, bottom line. So I'm recommending it on the fact as it is world building and it's Star Wars canon. And I know your opinion on Star Wars at the moment, but I still wanted to get it. So I'm saying it's more interesting than issue number 1 has been, and I'm going to continue. and I'll update you guys as far as if the story stinks or continues to be good, and I'll drop it if it's bad.
Well, here's my overall attitude. You, I think, are the only person that I know, or at least follow in the comic book community, that is probably still reading this book, because I can't seem to find any reviews for the High Republic comics anywhere. So I give you kudos for still keeping a positive attitude on the Star Wars book and continuing to read it. And you know something, Daniel? I'm really glad that you're enjoying it. Me personally, like you said, you know my attitude on Star Wars. Quite frankly, I just don't want to deal with Star Wars right now. I mean, look, all I want right now is for Kathleen Kennedy to get fired because I hate her. I can't stand what she's doing, and it's not necessarily the programming or the media that they're putting out. It's just the attitude that these people have towards the fans. The fact that they constantly are basically saying that we should not be a part of the Star Wars universe because it's the old ways, it's toxic masculinity, you know, the future is female, all that junk. It just turns me off. That's really what it is. But the other thing is, if I really was intrigued to pick up the High Republic comic books, I'll just let you know, outside of issue number 1, you can easily get your hands on the rest of them for cover price. So that obviously shows you what's been going on as a whole in regards to the comics. And it's not just the comics. I mean, there was something that happened in one of the High Republic books that just turned a whole bunch of people off. And it was the whole concept of Jedi and their sex life. I'm not kidding. It was one of the worst things to ever be put in a Star Wars story, because there are people that could look at it and just say, I'm not interested in it, but then people will basically take it to the next level. It's the fact that Jedi can have sex as long as they don't have any emotional attachment. So basically, it's not that Anakin had sex with Padme that caused him to cross over to the dark side. It's the fact that he actually cared and loved her. So, and this is not my own attitude. This is just what I've heard. There are people that basically say the message that that sends is just go out and have meaningless sex. That's what it's all about. First of all, if you're really going that deep in your thought process, I just think that you need to get a life. That's the number one idea there. But I don't know. I just don't think it's needed.
What did you bring to Quick Fix?
No, I was done there, by the way. Just wanted to let you know that I'm done there. No.
Too much Star Wars information for
well,
one day.
I'm just letting you know, because you don't watch as many as the comic book community videos as I do. You don't know as much as what I hear. So I'm just giving you the information. But I want to continue on with the whole concept of the indie books, and it's actually an older documentary film, but I watched it on YouTube so many times because it's just that good, and it's called The Image Revolution. It was the story of how Image Comics came to be. Now, growing up, I knew a little bit about this story, and I also felt very relatable to that story because there were people that said in the comments during the documentary that this was when, you know, we had all read Superman, Batman, Spider-Man comics before, but this was our chance to be like our parents and grandparents and get in on the ground floor and get invested in all of these brand new books. So just seeing the whole story, seeing the highs, seeing how Image almost fell apart, see how they managed to pick it all back up, it definitely was a great story, but at the same time, it also got me to do a little bit of research on some of those early Image books. And I think what was so interesting was they're not that difficult to find. And the other thing was, I didn't even know that some of these comic book lines had such small runs.
Well, I bought Spawn, not even knowing what the heck was going on with Image Revolution. A kid in school said to me, oh, I'm getting like this cool new comic coming out. So I gave him money to like reserve one for me. Because I remember our LCS where we went as a kid, they were reserving copies. Ended up selling like millions of issues, but I don't know why the hell they were reserving it.
I definitely did not know that there were only 10 issues of Youngblood. I didn't know that there were only 50 issues of Wildcats. I also did not even know that Alan Moore wrote a couple of issues of Wildcats, like a couple of story arcs. So, I mean, Alan Moore wrote Watchmen, so I definitely want to read some of those. And also, I want to read the Max. I mean, I have the first issue. I even have the Wizard exclusive 1/2 issue, but I guess it was because of the fact that I actually managed to get my hands on the short-lived MTV animated series of the Max that I want to really read the comic book. And I think it's only 35 issues, though for some strange reason, issue 35 is really hard to come by. But one of the other things that I love so much about all the local comic book stores is that they will buy boxes and boxes of collections. And over at my LCS, they say to me that we almost always get all those old first runs of Image Comics. So one of these days, I might be able to go there and just buy a handful because they're not that hard to hunt down. And it's not a matter of collecting. It's just a matter of reading because, like, I have Wildcats #1. I'd like to read more of it just to see what it's all about. I just really liked the story of how this comic book company came to be. And it's just great to know that some of these names are still making comic books and just still love reading comic books and writing comic books. I loved their beginnings. I loved what their attitudes were, and just knowing that this company was built on the mentality that it was just really, again, I think that's really what's pushing me to read more indie books right now.
Yeah, I also saw the documentary on your recommendation. And I also saw a documentary on AMC about Image Comics, which is somewhat similar, but a shortened version of it. Right. And what was cool about when they started, those writers from Marvel had the 44 top comics out of 50 among 10,000 titles coming out at the time. And then they go over to Image, and they make all these crazy titles, and they actually became #2. They got ahead of DC at one point.
Yeah, and it all made sense when I think it was Rob Liefeld's line in the documentary where he says, when we jumped DC, all the big stories started coming out and getting advertised over DC. I love the line, we broke Batman's back and we killed Superman. I love that.
That was awesome. That was an awesome line.
Yeah, that is a great line. But anyway, everybody, that's going to wrap up another episode of That's Comical when it comes to doing the month that was in recap. Dan, it was really great to have you back and chatting about all this stuff. I'm really excited to continue this conversation, but we're definitely going to add a little something to the pot because I think another major topic of discussion that we definitely need to discuss is what does the future hold for the big two. So obviously one of the things that we will be talking about is the next stage in DC's little story, and that of course is the Infinite Frontier. I of course picked up issue #0. Dan just mentioned it a little bit on the show, so we're definitely going to dive a little deeper into it, not necessarily the stories itself, but really what it leaves us as readers. Do we actually want to continue reading comics from the big two based on the direction that they're going? Because unfortunately, we won't really be able to do much in regards to talking about Marvel because King in Black will not be done yet. There's still more King in Black to read, but all I will say is some of the news that I'm hearing about what Marvel has to offer after King in Black, I don't really have high hopes for it, but we'll get into that another time. Anyway, everybody, thank you very much for watching. This was such a great show, and we are looking forward to seeing you in the next one. If you enjoyed the video you just watched, feel free to leave a comment. Also, feel free to subscribe if you want to be up to date with our latest videos. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you in the next one. Actions speak louder than words.